Well, Mark here with the Exiles. I hope you're safe and well. Much like a whole bunch of videos I've done in the last couple of weeks, we've been asking for feedback. Okay, we've been asking if people have got any questions while we're certainly in the UK, at least in a lockdown, to support our instructionals. Now, we've had some amazing feedback, and I'm super grateful. We've had some questions and things that people want to see that sit outside of the feedback for those instructionals. So, as per the last couple of videos. Not in the instructional playlist, I'm just trying to cover some of that Q&A, and this is one of those videos. So in this short video, what I'd like to talk about is Bicornio, okay, Posta de Bicornio. It's one of our two-handed posta. Before we went into the second lockdown in the UK, I actually arranged with one of my local Exiles instructor to do some videoing, okay, and Posta Bicornio was one of the things I wanted to video with him, okay, because to understand this posta, how to use it, okay, and some things from it and ways to get to it, you really need a partner. But since Bicornio is probably the thing I see people having the most amount of questions about, I wanted to at least do something to get people thinking about this posta and using this posta. Now, we've covered this posta before in the Posta Notes series, where Jason talks about the posta literally as it's described in the manuscript, what it's good for, and so on and so forth. What I want to do, and again, hopefully this will correlate well with you know, on video and so on and so forth, is I want to give you an idea of how to use Bicornio in motion, in action, okay? I'll really need a partner to properly demonstrate using Bicornio. So I'm going to try and choose actions that you can just watch along to and think about, or which you can do yourself. So you'll have to bear with me a little bit, obviously being solo. So we won't talk too much about Posta Bicornio. You can read the manuscript, or you can watch our previous videos on this posta, specifically the one from the Posta Notes. But it's taken, I'll get on this side so you can see my hands, it's taken like this, okay? Now, there are two main ways of holding the weapon with your hands, okay? In one manuscript like this, and one manuscript like this, and in the other two, including the Paris, it's a little bit confusing, in my view, okay? In reality, it's both, okay, and we'll probably cover that when I do a paired video. It's two horns, okay, so this one is one horn and the point is the other, and it's formed like this, and it's sat a little bit away from my chest, okay. It says in the manuscript, or in the Getty, that everything that Posta Longa can do, Posta Bicornio can do. Okay, so this is probing, being full of deceit. It's basically there to find holes and gaps in your opponent, okay? And Fiore specifically says in the Getty, she stays in the middle of the road, okay? Which means it stays central, okay? And the idea of this is that I've got a very good cone of defense, especially when I start closing. If your weapon is out extended and it's against mine, the closer I get to you, the more deflection I'm going to have on your weapon. And that's super important to bear in mind with Posta Longa as well, but specifically with Bicornio, okay? So for the rest of it, I'll need a partner, but again, I'm going to give you a couple of actions to hopefully get you thinking about using Bicornio. So there's using it as a posta, okay? Positioning your opponent, probing for holes in their guards. Yeah, obviously from here you're just sending out thrusts into Posta Longa, okay? And if you find a thrust at an angle, or you need to come offline to do it, then obviously you can do that, okay? The idea is I'm sending a thrust straight into whatever is open, okay? In terms of the hands, I can twist back out if I want to regain a sort of standard grip back on the weapon. I can leave it as it is. In terms of the hand coming over like this, well, this is, in my view, a functional thing. But again, it doesn't take very much to switch the hands. What this hand does here is it gives me a good amount of lateral stability. So if my opponent has met and we're trying to basically exchange thrusts against each other, I've got a really good amount of stability with this backhand here, where I can also position my point and give a bit of resistance to them if they're trying to dominate the center line. Again, it's not something I can show just on my own. So let me give you a couple of actions, okay? So let's start with a really easy one. Okay, let's look at switching into Bicornio from a play, okay? And this is just one example of many. Let's take the first play of Largo, okay? So I'll be up high, I'll do it this side, I'll be up high on my right shoulder, okay? I'm in the posta. I don't have to be in this posta, this is just the one I'm in at the moment, okay? Opponent cuts at me, I want to stay at largo and basically make a cover. I come offline a little bit. This accrease is super important with those first bunch of plays of the largo. Without the accrease, it becomes super clunky. Make the accrease and throw the weapon out. Now, I'm making a cover against my opponent, their attack, their fendente type action, okay? And I'm out. Now this cover could be into posta frontale, over the lead foot, no problem. Could be posta frontale. Or it could be a type of counter cut back at them, okay? I tend to land, and a lot of this, in fact a lot of my videos, I have to modify some of my actions because I have a lot of surgical metal in my right hand. I tend to land about mid-range between breve and posta longa. Okay, so I'm not posta longa, I'm not posta breve, I'm in the mid-range. That's something I have to do because of my own biomechanical traits, if you like. But in either case, I'm out. Okay, so I've made the incrusada of the first play of largo. Fiore says from here, if I have the centre line, I thrust. Okay, so if I've cut out here, you've cut at me, I've cut at you, or I've made a cover. If I have the centre line, i.e. your weapon is out here, and I've got an open head or body, I'm just going to thrust. It's as easy as that. If I make my cover or counter cut and I meet incrusada here, and I don't have the centre line, so my opponent's thrust is literally lined up, they've got the centre line on me, then I can't thrust anymore because I won't hit anything, so I will come offline, okay? And there's a couple of different ways to do that. The easiest way, the initial way we teach it, is to come offline again, put aside their point, and cut straight back down the line. Why am I going through all of this? Well, I cut out, or I've made a cover against my opponent, okay? We've met incrusada on the punta, okay? So our swords have met, I'll throw the image on the screen, our swords have met on the punta, so right at the end, right at the top of the sword, which means that we're quite far away from each other. Quite often what happens is the weapons will slide down to mezza, the middle of the sword anyway, with that crossing. As I say, I'll throw the image on the screen to show you what I mean. Let's say I've done that and my opponent has won the centre line, okay? So my weapon, if I thrust, I'm not going to hit them because their weapon is dominating the centre line and their thrust is set up on me. What I can do from here is I can force the issue. If I have the right distance, so if we met punta to punta, I can use Bicornio to force the issue. I can snap up into Bicornio to pull my weapon back into my core where it's strong, and I can re-dominate the centre line. The reason why that's particularly useful is because as Bicornio snaps in, I'm getting strength from it. I'm also bringing my point past the point where it was effectively a spent weapon, okay? It was just, my point was just dangling in the air. I brought it back into play, basically. And by snapping it back in close to my body like that, I've pulled the weapon on line and I've displaced their weapon in turn, okay? So that's the reason why I wanted to walk through those plays, because you have to understand the context. I've swung it out, I've landed in Crusada, I've not got anything on the end of that. I've got actions, but they're not quick actions. So from here, whether I've met it posta longa, posta frontale, my weird hybrid that I have to always explain to people, from here I'm literally just going to snap it up. Now, to help that along, I can make another accrease as well. So we're out, okay, and to help that along, I can make another accrease and just snap it all in nice and tight. So that's one way of using Bicornio from a play, okay? The next way of using Bicornio, and again, this is just to give you something to think about, to look at the manuscript yourself, perhaps have a little practice yourself if you're in isolation at the moment, to have a think about some of these actions and how you can use Bicornio to suit your own preferences as well. So that's from a play. My favourite way of entering into Bicornio is if I have a very non-committal opponent, i.e. my opponent wants to constantly play right on the edge of distance. If they have the luxury of space, I'm a close range, mid-range type swordsman, so I like to be close, and I get very frustrated with people that want to stay at distance. And of course that's their privilege and their right, and they fight how they like to fight. But this is my favourite action of getting into this posta, apart from just taking up the posta itself, of course, which is obviously described in the manuscript and so on. So quite often what I do is I will gain an awful lot of distance to force my opponent to swing at me. I want them on their right shoulder, and I want them ideally to make a fendente, although Mezzani, as long as it's high, this has a pretty high success rate with that as well. So I might be in my own Posta di Donna. I could even be low, although it's a lot of space to gather up and snap into that Posta. So let's keep it high. I will make a very large crease forward, okay, to basically make them do an action, a fendente type action. And what I'll do from this high Posta is I will snap it straight down into Bicornio. So if they are cutting at me, then I'm looking to use my Bicornio to dominate the centre line. What you will find, and this is where it's really hard on my own to show you, is even if they've initiated that cut, by swinging down like this, okay, what I effectively do is beat their sword out the way. So if their angle is nice and tight and I literally swing down like this, it's almost a break type action that Fury describes. It's almost like breaking the thrust but against the cut. I actually look to make contact on their weapon, okay, so as they're cutting and I'm snapping into Bicornio to deflect their weapon down to basically dominate the centre line. Okay, so I'll just snap it in like this, and that's my favourite way of using Bicornio, if I'm not just taking it up as a standalone Posta. You can come offline with that as well, yeah, and it's just a fendente type action, so it's a fendente type path, and I'm just replacing the grip on the weapon at the back at the very last second. So offline, swinging it down, okay, very, very useful, okay. I could also, incidentally, just snap straight out into Posta Longa, but I'm relying on the fact that my opponent is very slow if I do that, because I want to hit them with it rather than just land in the Posta. So here, very, very nice way of using Bicornio. And once I'm in the Posta, I've got the thrust on, or I've got the strengths of that Posta. So once I've landed, I can just thrust. Or I can start to displace a little bit, use a bit of pressure to find an opening to dominate the centre line. So that's the second way that I want people to think about with using Bicornio. Okay, another way to use Bicornio, to find ourselves in this Posta, to then start taking advantages of that position. Let's take it from Posta Breve. Okay, this is another nice entry. Bicornio is a very useful Posta if you're facing an armoured opponent. Okay, and again, I'll explain more when I get to do this with another person. Okay, so we've done two examples already. Let's take it from the exchange of thrust principle that I've showed in a previous instructional. I think it was instructional number 2 or 3, but it's on the title. So opponent's going to thrust at me, I'm moving, I'm operating in master battle, I'm looking for my opportunity. They are thrusting at me, I'm going to collect that and step through, okay? As I've stepped through to dominate the centre line, to exchange a thrust and put in my own thrust, okay, after displacing their weapon, let's say they start to come back across their body, or they start to push my weapon aside with their cover, their own cover coming back. So basically, they've done a thrust and I've put it aside. As I'm lining up my own thrust, let's say they start to bring this weapon back into play. Bicornio is very, very useful from this type of position. So I've come offline, I've collected the thrust and I've landed Posta Breve. They start pushing aside my thrust, so what I'm going to do is lift up the arms and gather forward. Okay? Now, you've got to get the distance right with this one, because what you don't want to do is snap into Bicornio as they're already busy pushing your point offline, in which case you're just going to be up like this. So you've got to be quite sensible about how you approach this one. I've come offline, done my exchange. I'm lining up my own thrust, getting ready, sending in that thrust. They start putting it aside, there's a little bit of pressure there, and I literally just snap up. Now I can do this right and left foot forward, but in both instances, what I like to do is add another small gather forward, okay? I'm looking to thrust at them basically, but I'm trying to change and make a very high fulcrum, basically, okay? So in terms of where the blades are making contact. And I'll snap into Bicornio from there. From the side, okay, so it doesn't matter how I've come to the exchange, come offline, as I start to send in my own thrust, they're going to put it aside, so I'm going to snap up with a gather and basically just take away their leverage and just re-dominate the centre line. So that's another way of looking at Bicornio. Let's do one more. Okay, the fourth and last action, again, just to get you thinking about using Bicornio, since I'm on my own and it's very difficult to demonstrate the real strengths of using this poster, but also transitioning to this poster during a series of actions as the fight's unfolding. So again, I've said in previous videos, this is just a tool. So I'm using this sword, this two-handed sword, this long sword with 1 and 2 hands. I'm using it like this and so on and so forth, okay? So let's take that mentality and think about Bicornio. This is an action I've done from time to time, and I'll be totally honest, I can't explain why I do it, okay? It's just, I've got all this, you know, my best understanding of the system in my head, and I guess instinct just sort of takes over. But with one hand on the weapon, sometimes what will happen, especially with me, because you know I'm an instructor, if I'm sparring with students, etc., some of them are a little bit apprehensive about what I might do, right? Because there's the experience gap and so on and so forth. So quite often when I'm sparring one-handed, I'll make a cover against someone's cut, okay? And they will not want to commit to distance. So they will basically try and move back as quickly as possible, okay? Which is an entirely natural, normal thing to do. For reasons I'm not quite sure, perhaps people can maybe tell me why I do this and why it might be useful or why it might be stupid. I will make that inside cover with my one hand on the weapon, and as they start to retreat back, I will follow them after transitioning into Bicornio, okay? Because as I say, this is just a tool, so nothing stopped me putting another hand back on it, okay? So I'll make the cover, and as they start to retreat, and by retreat, whether they've got one hand or two, what I mean is they will cut right on the edge of distance and they will basically just take 2 or 3 paces back. I will follow them with Bicornio. I guess I don't like to follow them with a posta longa or a cut because I'm not sure what's going on, and more often than not they will turn their cut, whether it's one or two-handed, into some kind of hybrid cover to basically protect their left line from me attacking down that line, I suspect. But in either case, it's probably it's quite a common thing to happen. I'll make the cover. They will start very quickly retreating back, and I will just snap into posta Bicornio to follow them, basically. And once I've snapped into here, I could do another pace and do a thrust or whatever. But it tends to be something that I do just purely out of, it's not habit, it's got to be some sort of instinct. Maybe it's just, it suits my preferences or whatever. But it's a worthwhile one to mention here because this is a good example of dropping into, and there's loads of, you know, examples. As I say, I'm challenged as I'm on my own. But it's a good example of sometimes doing something that suits your preference, okay? And this certainly seems to suit my preference. So it works for me, it might not work for others. I guess if I'm looking at the advantages of doing that, of making the cover and coming over into Bicornio, is that I'm not committing my arms to a line, okay? If they're recovering, certainly if we've gotten to a very messy cover, and that tends to happen when you've got one hand versus one hand, things get a bit messy and you get very close and there's the second arm to think about. I guess it's a good fail-safe option of coming back to the centre line to try and dominate the centre line without extending your arms and committing. So for example, you know, coming into posta longa or even cutting back, I suspect in those moments my head thinks it's a bit of a risk, so I cut into Bicornio to basically make sure that I've got the defence of the posta, and then I tend to follow out with a secondary action, which is the thrust. In either case, it's a good example, I think, to throw in. Although, if I'm totally honest, it's you know, it's not something that I drill or practice. It's just something I seem to get to from time to time. So, 4 examples of snapping into that posta in motion. As I've said, we've got videos on the channel about Bicornio. Just purely as it is in the manuscript. So taking up as a posta to force your opponent to do certain things and to try and have some predictable actions from your opponent. The strengths of the posta are pretty self-explanatory, and we will do more when I can partner up with someone and show you. But let me know what you think of these options. Let me know if you have other ways of using Bicornio. For me, and I've said this also in a previous video, I'm completely up for individuality as long as it satisfies the principles of the system. And in a previous video I talk about my personal 5 rules for making sure that I'm not drifting too far away from what I think Fury wanted me to do. So you know, and that last example there is a really good one of a bit of individuality with a system that is effectively a framework for a martial artist, not a rule book. So hope that helps for now. Thank you for your time, stay safe, and I will catch you again.